this Honorable Legislative Assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
I, Jonathan Tibbetts, swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give to this Honorable Legislative Assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Ms. Yearwood and Mr. Tibbetts, and thank you all for coming. As you are aware, we're continuing our hearings on the Health Services Account 2016. As usual, when you answer the first question for the record, just state your full name and your position that you occupy. Ms. Lizette, I'd just like to back up a little bit. We got the impression during the evidence that you gave, the evidence that the chairman gave, the evidence that the CFO gave, that the Deloitte consultancy was going to solve the problems and implement the corrections that were identified by the Auditor General in the report. The documentation that we've been supplied with, i.e. the RFP, the contract for Deloitte, seems to indicate otherwise, in that they seem to have been employed to identify the problems. But there's another round to come where somebody else will be hired to fix the solution. Can you give us an explanation as to a particular reason why it was done that way?
Lizette Yearwood, Chief Executive Officer of the Health Services Authority. Mr. Chairman, the Deloitte company was hired on a consultancy in order to identify the gaps in the systems, in the various controls, and make recommendations. We felt that this was the most productive and expedient way in order to do so, because how we've actually approached it, once their recommendations were made, we recognized that there was some of the work that could actually be done in-house in order to mitigate some of the financial overheads.
But wasn't the part of the Auditor General's remit, they did not identify the areas that they thought should be improved in order to go to get to a clean audit report?
Mr. Chairman, can you repeat that question? Who are you referring to that didn't make the recommendations?
It is my understanding as chairman that the Auditor General, in performing their audit, identified through management letters the areas that needed to be improved to get to an unqualified report.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is correct, but those were broad areas that needed improvement. For example, it speaks to receivables, but what we had done is the consultant came in and went through all of the controls that were in place to determine how far are we in order to meeting those expectations.
So we misunderstood your evidence and the CFO evidence and the chairman evidence that Deloitte was employed to fix the problem. Deloitte was never employed to fix the problem. Deloitte was employed to identify the problem in great detail.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Given the timeline in that the chairman has gone on record and gone out on a limb to say that he will produce a clean report December 2018. Given that timeline, that all of these corrections would have to be in place on January 1, 2018, do you believe that you will accomplish that through the process of having two different consultancies?
Mr. Chairman, I'm quite confident. Based on the report that came back from the consultant, it was recognized that we had pretty much about 85% of all the controls in place. So they did identify the area that we still had to do some work on, and work has already started in that area. And I must say that as far as the receivables are concerned, we have seen a tremendous improvement since the beginning of the year, even with some of the work that we've been doing. Because recognizing that, there's a lot of work to be done, we have to make sure that we have the processes and the systems in-house to be able to continue this past December 2018. And really the work that's been done by the Patient Financial Services team and the accounts team has really been tremendous. For example, the collections that we've seen since the beginning of the year has drastically increased. We moved from an average of $6 million a month collections to this month, October, we're almost up to $14 million, and the month still has a few more days to go. So the controls that we're putting in place in order to improve revenue capture is already beginning to yield some very positive results. So to make a long answer short, yes, I am quite confident that by the end of 2018, we will be able to have a clean opinion.
What is the expectation of the HSA in having the consultants spend so much time and effort on developing a costing model for the HSA?
Mr. Chairman, the costing model is something that has been necessary now for many years, really since from the inception of the hospital. And I think you've actually asked questions around that in previous hearings, because we genuinely can't say that what we are charging for the services that we provide are actually the cost that is put into providing them. So that's one of the reasons behind having a costing model in place, so that we can be more confident that all the consumables and all of the non-consumables that go toward delivering a service is actually captured in a very succinct way. And that is something that previous boards have recognized as well was necessary. And we're very happy to be able to work on that. But that is not necessary in order to achieve the clean opinion. So that's why that is something that we will start working on at the beginning of the year rather than for the remaining months of this year, sir.
But aren't what you can charge largely established by the Health Insurance Commission in setting the rates for charging?
Absolutely, sir. Mr. Chairman, those charges are put in place by the Health Insurance Commission. However, when the Health Insurance Commission is doing that exercise, what they do is they go around to all of the local providers to ask us what our charges are. And basically from that, they have their actuaries go through and do an analysis to determine what those standard health insurance fees should be. So in essence, if we're submitting to them what our billing is, our charges are, and there's really no comfort that those charges are actually what it's costing to provide the service, then they will just use numbers that perhaps are erroneous in providing the actuary's information to do the standard health insurance fees.
The timelines as put forward by Deloitte do not seem to concur with your assertion that you will have it done by December. Or have you met all of the timelines in their report to date? And all the stuff that they said should have been implemented is already implemented?
Mr. Chairman, we have the finance team that's putting together that report now to give us some feedback as to where they're at. But so far, my last look at what our achievements were, yes, we have met what we feel we can comfortably do before the end of the year that will meet those recommendation expectations.
So there's really no need. Have you gone out with an RFP for the second stage of the consultancy, or you don't think there's going to be any need to do that consultancy?
At this point in time, we haven't recognized any need to go out for a second consultancy. But what we have decided to do is that there are recommendations that we can almost use as an a la carte. So we can use components of the recommendation to say we need a consultant for X, and then we go and look for a consultant to help us, for example, with a costing model. If that's something that we want to look at a consultant to help us do, we would go and just look for a consultant through an RFP process in order to get someone in-house to do that. Whereas if we had looked at it, previously, we would have looked to see we need an RFP to get all of the recommendations covered, but we really feel that we have the ability to do some of that work in-house now that it's been clearly identified and the recommendations set out in such a succinct way that we can actually work on some of that.
Well, I guess the million-dollar question is, are you suggesting that the lack of revenue correction was one of competence rather than policies and procedures being in place?
Mr. Chairman, no, that's not what I'm saying. I think what we said was that 85% of the controls were already in place. So there are a number of controls and training that needs to be done in order to make sure that everybody's on the same page. We have staff that, where there's a staff turnover, and obviously whenever there's new staff come in, they have to understand the culture, the expectations, and also all of the processes and procedures. And there, sometimes we see that there's a gap in their understanding and their performance based on the need for training and retraining. So training has been a particular emphasis this time as well.
Okay. If I don't know if you have the Deloitte report there with you, but on page 28 of the implementation plan, I'll just pick one of them. Work stream, update and develop policies and procedures. Major activities. Perform a review of existing policies and procedures and update as required to ensure alignment with business processes and objectives. 2, develop policies and procedures for areas currently not captured, e.g. claims processing, insurance provider payment receipt. 3, establish a process whereby policies and procedures undergo an annual review to ensure they remain current and up to date. Evidence of the review should be retained. Additional changes should be communicated to staff. 4, as part of Workstream 6, training, communicate new and revised policies and procedures to staff and perform training sessions to ensure staff have a clear understanding of the process and expectations. Deliverables recommended by the consultant. Update and new policies and procedures. 2, policy and procedures, library and supporting process for review and approval of policy and procedures. Estimated duration, 4 months. You got a report in July, August, September, October, November. You're saying that this is all completed. That 80% of these policies and procedures were already in place. You only need to update and get new policies in 20% of the spaces, and most of that has already been completed.
Yes, sir, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. And that would be for all of these areas in the implementation plan that are under 4 months, because there is the training obviously is projected out to the end of next year, I think, because the implementation plan timeline by the consultants is, you would have gotten, they were predicting that it would take 4 months to update and develop policies and procedures, to establish a 3 lines of defense framework, would take 6 months. Implement a change management process and steering committee would take 3 months. Audit the revenue cycle and SORNA would take 4 months. Implement and remediate control deficiencies, 2 months, and then 2 months later, another 2 months. Training, the whole year. Statistical reporting, 6 months. Develop a performance management system. And you're comfortable that all of this, other than the training, which I agree with new staff coming in, but all the training required for existing staff will be completed by the 31st of December 2017. So we start 2018 with a clean slate.
Mr. Chairman, the training has already started, and it's pretty much completed. And we need just to continue to make sure that we're updating them with any new policies and procedures. Yes, sir.
You already put in place the 3 lines of defense framework.
Yes, sir. Let me talk a little bit about the 3 lines of defense. Mr. Chairman, what we had in place was an internal audit office, and we didn't have a compliance department. And as a result, the internal auditor was having to do some of the compliance work as well as the internal audit work. So instead of trying to now implement an office for the compliance in addition to the internal audit office, what we have decided to do is to look around within government to see where some of our resources lie. And we've had discussions with the internal audit office and came up with an agreement with them that what we would do is to put in place a service level arrangement that they would help us with the internal audit function. So we're actually outsourcing the internal audit function. What we did was we seconded our internal auditor to the internal audit office to work along with them in order to be able to provide that function. The other line of defense is compliance. So we are actually setting up a compliance unit within the hospital then to be able to provide that level of service. So rather than having compliance as well as internal audit, in order to try to expedite the process, be more productive, we've outsourced that function to government's internal audit.
So are you confident that you got your money's worth from Deloitte if they only addressed 20% of the problem because you fixed 80% of it yourself?
Mr. Chairman, I think we can be assured that the consultant has provided the full scope of the service that we hired them to provide, because what they did, in order to come up with the recommendations and with the gaps, they had to look at everything that was currently in place as well. And that included the 85% of the controls that were already there.
I have a couple of questions on the RFP. The RFP, you're confident that the RFP complied entirely with the procurement legislation of government?
Mr. Chairman, the RFP for
the consultants, which Deloitte won.
Yes, sir. We followed all of the steps as far as compliance is concerned with the PMFL.
Anybody has any questions while I look for some documents?
Good morning, and thanks very much for the CEO and the chairman joining us this morning. My question today, or questions rather, are centered around 2 areas: governance and competence. And the first question I have to ask is, seeing that this has been an ongoing problem, and in some cases the same individuals have been there for a long time, is that do you have the confidence in the finance team at this time to make sure that this problem is fixed?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, sir, I'm confident with the action plan that we have in place, that we have the team that is not only competent but dedicated and passionate at making sure that this takes place.
The reason, thank you very much, Madam CEO. Through you, Mr. Chairman, the reason why I'm asking this question is one of the things that we had asked for was the job descriptions and also the role profile for the senior functions within the finance department, namely the CFO, the chief financial officer, and the financial controller. And I was a little bit surprised that while we did receive a job description or a role profile for the HR position, we didn't receive one for the chief financial officer position, and that was a little bit odd. It's almost as if to insinuate that there's no formal job description. No, we did receive an evaluation tool, But that in itself is simply that and a performance evaluation tool. And we were specifically looking for the job description for the chief financial officer, which was not submitted to the committee.
Mr. Chairman, through you, I think maybe there's a bit of a misunderstanding in regards to the template, because what we were doing was changing over the template from the standard job description and incorporating all of the aspects of the job description into performance tool, and that is something that we had started doing. I think it was back in 2010. So we were gradually integrating all the job descriptions in that new format. So in essence, what you've seen in that document would have been the expectations of that position.
Well, with that said, and I just want to touch on, in essence, then what is required of the role that you guys have submitted. Inside the position for the chief financial officer, it asks for a bachelor's degree in accounting or finance with a master's degree preferred as under education. Certificate and licenses, it says must be a chartered accountant, certified public accountant, or certified management accountant. And in terms of experience, it says must have at least 7 years of relevant work experience in accounting, as an accountant or finance manager, preferably in the healthcare system. Now, one of the things that kind of really, I guess, I found odd is that the experience that they ask for the chief financial officer is less than the experience that they ask for the financial controller that reports to the chief financial officer. I would expect that the CFO would have been pretty much the one that would have the most experience that would be required in that position. So I don't understand why the financial controller is being asked for more than the CFO. That one kind of really threw me off a little bit.
Mr. Chairman, is there a question?
Yeah, well, the question is, why is the experience requirement for the chief financial officer less than it is for the financial controller? That is the question, sorry.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chairman, can you specifically indicate what is the experience that you're referring to that's required of the CFO that is, or is not required of the CFO, but is required of the financial controller?
Yeah, I can read it out here for you. The CFO, I'm sorry. Sorry, let's make sure I got the right one here. Okay. The CFO experience is must have at least 7 years of relevant work experience as an accountant or finance manager, preferably healthcare system. That's the experience required for the CFO. The experience required for the financial controller is must have at least 5 to 7 years post-qualification experience, healthcare experience preferred, have a thorough understanding of accounting policies and procedures, knowledge of generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, in the US, Canada, or UK, knowledge of computer systems and programs utilized in accounting processing at HSA, knowledge and skills with word processing, spreadsheets, database, and other software. That's its financial controller versus one line for the CFO.
Mr. Chairman, through you, I think the CFO obviously is the oversight of that position, and the financial controller is required to have more technical capabilities, but certainly the CFO would have to oversee that position.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, why is there a requirement for both the CFO and the financial controller to have a degree in accounting or finance?
Mr. Chairman, through you, I think it's pretty obvious why they would need to have a degree in accounting and finance. Maybe I'm missing the point of your question.
No, well, the point is going to be made clear, is that both position asks for a degree in accounting or finance, but yet the CFO neither possesses both. Neither. Based on the qualifications that were sent through, the CFO here degree is actually in economics and management, not accounting or finance. They're two complete different disciplines.
Mr. Chairman, through you, I would need to look again, but I'm pretty sure that she also has a degree in accounting, and I will need to come back to you in regards to that.
Through you again, Mr. Chairman, the reason I'm going to tell you where this line of question is going is that we ask for experience, must have at least 7 years of relevant work experience as an accounting or finance manager, preferably in the healthcare system. This is what is asked for of the CFO position now, and also must have 5 to 7 years post-qualification experience for the financial controller. When I look at the resume, Mr. Chairman, that was submitted for when the CFO was hired, the CFO basically possessed none of these skills. As a matter of fact, prior to, based on the resume submitted to this committee, other than a group accounting job at the Shipping Services Limited from 2001 to 2003, there is no other work experience listed on the resume that was submitted for us for the CFO, and I am really concerned when the HSA, a $100 million organization, hires a person with 2 years of accounting experience, none of the requirements that the job asks for, and then pretty much wondering why we are where we are today. 12 years in the role and still having the challenges that we're having. And this, Ms. Yearwood, is really and truly the crux of the matter that we have. And this is the confidence that I'm looking for, and maybe others in this committee is looking for, that we have a mismatch of skill sets. The job asks for one thing, we hired something else, and then we are surprised at the results we're having. And I think this is really what it is that needs to stop within the HSA.
Mr. Chairman, through you, just to go back a little bit, the authority was put in place in 2002. In 2005, it wasn't under my leadership, but in 2005 was when the CFO was brought on as a consultant at that time to assist. Prior to that, there had been 4 CFOs that had been with us from 2002 to 2005. And there actually had been a large period of time when there wasn't a CFO in place at all. So the current CFO was brought in at that time as a consultant and worked to help get the accounts in place, and was subsequently after that hired to take on the role of CFO, which was not something that was a highly desired position at that time. And I can tell you that the current post holder has worked diligently, has worked hard in order to bring the accounts from where it was then to where it is now. And often hindsight is 20/20, right? But there were a number of management points back at that time, and we have come down from, I think it's like 11 management points to where we have 4 in place now, and we're about to close those in order to get a clean opinion in the next year. So having said that, I think that the current post holder has really proven her worth in the organization, and I think what needs to be recognized is a level of complexity. I think any accountant or CFO or any layperson looking into an organization will think that, you know, it is something that's easy and should been done long time ago. But the complexity that we have with all of the services that we provide and the different areas that they're provided, it's a lot coming forward, and tremendous work has been done in order to put in place the various controls to make it what it is today. So I think that the post holder is really proving her worth in that post, Mr. Chairman.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I completely disagree. You hire a person with a degree in economics who had 2 years worth of accounting experience at a shipping services company, and you hand them $100 million hospital they're about to run. And I'm sorry, I can't accept that. And the question that I really need to ask is, how was this consultant, what was the process where this consultant was brought in? was the genesis of this consultant arriving at the HSA?
Mr. Chairman, through you, I can't speak to that process because I wasn't in post at the time.
Mr. Chairman, through you, and this is the advantage of being a prior member on the HSA board and having access where I don't delete emails. And Ms. Lizette, I just want to remind you of your involvement in your previous role as Deputy CEO, where you were also involved in the recruitment process of prior CFOs. So this is something that is actually not news to you. And I do have copies of emails here where you were copied on, and in some cases you were the author of the email, where we were actually going through the process of finding CFOs, and in one particular where you actually forwarded CFO CV. So this is something in your role as Deputy CEO. I can't see where this is something that would just be outside your remit. But here's what I'm going to submit then, is that one, prior to the person starting in the HSA in June 2005, the person was not employed. The person is actually the wife of a doctor at the HSA, and it is this kind of culture at the HSA that needs to be tackled. So basically, you take someone who was unemployed, sitting at home, who was a dependent on the husband work permit, and brought her in, gave her something to do. She ended up in a role, and the reality of it is, it has been a mismatch in that position since. The reality of it is, you need a person with a degree in accounting to do this job, or finance as required. You need the relevant experience. You do need the Big 4, Big 5, Big 6 accounting experience required. There are certain things that you pick up along the way that accountants will tell you pick up, that an economist wouldn't pick up. And this is something now that don't care how much money we have spent along it, this is going to be a problem that is going to go on. And you need solid leadership within the finance function of the HSA. But now to sit down and ask for other people over the years to have qualifications that the CFO doesn't have is one of the reasons why we have this problem that we have. I can tell you, based on the resume that was submitted here, when this person was hired, I can tell you there is no way this person should have been hired as a consultant to work in any finance function within the HSA. And Mr. Chairman, I don't know if everyone see, but I just want to submit the resume here along with the qualifications so the public can see the kind of behavior. Because I can tell you, there are Caymanians out there that have far more qualification than this, that was not given an opportunity, that applied and was not given an opportunity. And now, 12 years into the role, we're still having the same problems that we have. So I also want to submit it for the record so the public can see exactly what it is that we're working with, and then they can make their own decision.
Mr. Chairman, through you, just to clear the air, I know that the member is referring to emails from me in regards to various positions in the finance department, but I'd like him to indicate whether he had any emails to represent the fact that I was on a recruitment committee for the current CFO at that time.
No, I don't have any for that. I just have one in the past where
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
she was submitting for other CFO positions.
Well, I think it's fairly obvious why we are. But let's get back to the hiring of Deloitte as a consultant. From the documentation supplied to the committee, it appears that the HSA outsourced the selection. You did well, let's back up a little bit. You did an RFP, but it was done not through public advertisements in the media, etc. It was done by invitation. Is that correct?
It was a departmental RFP, as far as I am aware, yes.
Yeah, but it was done by invitation, not by...
I think they went out to the Big 4 to make sure that we...
So therefore, all of the firms that were invited would have been pre-qualified before they got an invitation letter.
I can't say that for sure.
But I mean, that would be logical. If you're selecting Form A, B, C, and D to send them an RFP by invitation, I think the procurement legislation would require that everybody who's invited meets the criteria to do the job.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, can you repeat that question?
I think it is fair to assume that if you're doing a tender process by invitation as opposed to total public advertisement and anybody can apply. Before a company was invited, they would have met the in-house criteria to qualify to do the job.
That's a fair assumption, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
What I don't understand then is that in looking at the tender process, you tendered to KPMG was invited, Deloitte was invited, Bookkeeping Concepts was invited, PricewaterhouseCoopers was invited, Ernst & Young were invited to do a tender. From the documentation here, PricewaterhouseCoopers did not want to prejudice opportunity to participate in the potential second phase because the RFP said quite clearly that whoever won the part one would not be allowed to tender for part two. I would like a little explanation for the rationale behind that. Why would you automatically eliminate a person who's making recommendations from implementing those recommendations?
Mr. Chairman, I think that the rationale at the time, the thought process at the time was that they would have an unfair advantage having gone through the first phase to be in a position to be able to then tender and be successful in the second phase. So I think it was meant to be something that was fair.
Okay. The tenders are received from KPMG for $184,500, from Deloitte for $198,000, from Bookkeeping Concepts for $52,000. Mm-hmm. The analysis of the tenders says that Bookkeeping Concepts were eliminated because they only had 3 years experience, but the RFP asked for 5. The question is, knowing that they only had 3, why were they invited to tender on a document requiring 5 years experience?
Mr. Chairman, as I was not intimately involved in that process, I can't say that Bookkeeping Concepts were actually invited or whether they heard about it and they applied afterwards. I cannot speak to that.
But if you invite companies based on selection criteria, you would not accept a bid from somebody whom you didn't invite.
Mr. Chairman, your point is well taken, but I can't say with any level of confidence that they were invited to. If you understand what I'm saying, I mean, they, you're saying that all of the companies were invited to bid. I can't say that they were, and it was knowing that they did not meet the requirements.
The letter of invitation for them to bid comes from you.
Right, but what I'm saying is I did not see what their qualifications were before they bid.
But earlier we established that under the spirit, and I believe the letter of the law, of the procurement law, if you were going to do a tender by invitation, there would have to have been some kind of pre-selection, pre-qualification criteria established and documented. You're saying that wasn't done. These were just invited to tender.
I didn't personally do it, so I would need to go back and look at the documents, sir.
Oh, okay. All right. Because then the other big four, KPMG was eliminated because they provided insurance in US rather than CI. And there doesn't seem to be any attempt in the analysis process to find out whether that was simply a mistake, and they could quite willingly provide it in CI, so that we wound up, given the successful tender, actually wound up to be the highest bidder on the contract, because we eliminated the other 2.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. if we could look a little bit at the bad debt, which has been hanging around for a long time. As requested, you did produce for the committee a request from yourself as Chief Executive Officer, a request to the board to write off substantial amounts of the public debt, which I must confess I hadn't had the opportunity to read all this in great detail and study it the way I would normally do. But since you so willingly and kindly brought the board chairman along, I wonder if I could ask the board chairman why you establish a bad debt policy, you make a bad debt allocation approved in the budget, but then the board refuses to write off a request to write off debt coming from the Chief Executive Officer of the HSA.
Mr. Chairman, Jonathan Tibbetts, Chairman of the Board, HSA. Mr. Chairman, to answer your question, sir, when the bad debt report came to the board to be written off, we wanted to get additional supporting information to ensure that all avenues had been explored, all possible ways of collecting the funds had been exhausted, and we would therefore be only writing off debts that we knew were absolutely uncollectible.
You're not suggesting that the board doesn't have the confidence in the CFO and the Chief Executive Officer to believe that when they request bad debt, they have exercised all of that and meet the provisions of the policy that you approve?
Mr. Chairman, not at all. We do believe that the CEO and CFO have certainly the skills and the foresight into looking to this information. However, due to the fact that we felt that there could be any outside information that may not have been privy to the CEO and the CFO, we wanted to review it and ensure.
And how would the board access that information?
Mr. Chairman, through personal contacts, through business associates and so forth, we would perhaps have knowledge of certain accounts that may not be privy to the CEO and CFO.
Are you still confident that the bad debt policy that you put in place should remain as it is, or should it be tweaked in order that you will be in a position to accept recommendations coming from the Chief Executive Officer to actually write off the debt? What more do they need to do before the board will agree to write off the debt?
Mr. Chairman, the board has already written off some of the bad debt, as I think you've been able to see. And the policy is always one that is a working document. I don't think there's ever any policy that shouldn't or couldn't be changed based on the needs of the population at the time. Mr. Chairman, the bad debt policy certainly has been put in place as far as us being able to utilize it through the CEO and via the CFO after that. But certainly is one that we continue to review, and as the board continues to evolve as far as its needs and the needs of the organization change, we need to make sure that the document is one that can be fluid, that can adjust with the times, and it's certainly never, to me, a policy that would be not able to change or adjust according to the needs of the population and the organization.
Well, the board, the CEO requested total recommendation for write-off was 27.6 million. And it seems like the board agreed only to write off 9.2 million. Do you believe that what percentage of that unwritten off debt has the board's contacts been able to collect?
Mr. Chairman, the amount that was written off was any amount over 6 years old. That was based on the recommendation, actually, of senior CPA with one of the big four, or former senior CPA with one of the big four, in consultation with the board, that anything over 6 years
So the
would
board,
be.
the board has consultations with Big Four accountants
No,
separate and
sir.
apart from the,
No, sir. The person that we consulted at the time would have been the counselor for the Ministry of Health. Sorry. So
ooh, 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 ooh. You're saying that you consulted with the counselor responsible for health on the bad debt request from the CEO of the HSA, and on his recommendation, you only agreed to write off less than, well, about a third.
Sir, Mr. Chairman, the consultation regarded the fact that debts over 6 years old would not be collectible. I didn't in any way consult with any ministry official as far as what the bad debts were, the amounts, and so forth. The consultation was a conversation in regards to the age of any bad debts being over 6 years old as uncollectible due to the statute of limitations in the law.
Is there any written record of that consultation with the counselor?
Mr. Chairman, that would have been a casual conversation. I don't recall a written or email regarding that.
Is it recorded in the minutes of the HSA why that judgment call was made based on that consultation, or?
No, sir, not to my knowledge. Mr. Chairman, if I may add as well, the Director of Finance on the HSA board also made the recommendation that that because it was over 6 years old, it would be uncollectible due to statute of limitations.
Okay, so
And that would be recorded.
all of the existing bad debt of the HSA, the 122 million that appears in the accounts, none of that is over 6 years old.
Sir, I would have to confirm that, but I don't believe that it would be over 6 years old.
Thanks. Through you, Mr. Chairman, just switching gears to the HR department. What is the current size of the HR department?
Mr. Chairman, through you, the current size of the current head count at the Health Services Authority is 833, and we have 890 FTEs, with some of those being vacant at this time.
Sorry, I'm looking for the Human Resource Department, the head count in the Human Resource Department, sorry.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, if my memory is correct, I think we have a head count of 7 or 8 persons in HR.
Okay, and thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chairman, and it's been like that for quite some time now in terms of, have there been any vacancies or redundancies in that department, or it has been roughly like that for quite some time?
Mr. Chairman, through you, that has been for some time. We have a number of, I think there's 2 other positions that have been identified to be added to that department, but the current post holders have been there for some time.
Okay. Who was the, through you, Mr. Chairman, sorry. Who was the previous HR director before Ms. Riley?
We had a gentleman, through you, Mr. Chairman, that was there by the name of Ed City.
And roughly, through you, Mr. Chairman, how many people did he supervise or manage?
Mr. Chairman, that number was pretty much static.
Okay, well, thank you very much for clarifying that for me. Because one of the things I'm also looking at was the requirements, both in knowledge and experience with the HR director. And I noticed she have a master's degree in HR management, but we were trying to understand what the undergraduate degree was in, or I was trying to understand what her undergraduate degree was in.
Mr. Chairman, the post holder also has a diploma in HR, and She basically grew up in the organization. She started out as a clerical officer in the organization, and then she worked in the HR department while she was undergoing her studies.
Thank you very much. The reason why I ask is I'm looking at the job requirements for that position, both in experience and qualifications. And it appears that at the time of her appointment, she also didn't meet the requirements that is being asked for in that position, both from a experience and a qualification standpoint.
Mr. Chairman, through you, the current post holder was in the process of getting her degree at the time, and it was part of our succession planning to work with her while she was actually supervised by the then HR director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason why I'm actually going through this, and I saw the other because I noticed there were other applicants who were more qualified, who had more experience, but for whatever reason were not given the job. Which brings me then to the position of CEO, where basically where I'm looking at it also, and the requirements for the job that is required now. Ms. Ola, when you were appointed to that role, you yourself did not have the necessary qualifications that is being asked for in that role at this point.
That's right, but during that period of time, Mr. Chairman, I was able to get a master's in healthcare administration.
Okay, thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chairman, and this is now directed to the chairman of the HSA. Section 15 of the HSA law clearly gives the power to employ staff to the board and not to the senior management. And I am wondering now, based on where we have 3 senior positions in the HSA, CEO, CFO, and HR director, when none of those positions at their appointment met the qualifications that is outlined in those posts. Now, I'm a big fan in terms of succession planning, employee development, and everything else, but it seems that there is a culture of taking persons who are not qualified for the role, but being basically put them into the role. And that's fine. I'm all for giving people chances. But the question is now, based on the performance of the HSA, and given this culture and the problems that we have had now for more than a decade, the question is, at what point is the board going to step in and say, you know what, that may have been fine in the past, but at some point now, we need to put our foot down and recognize this isn't working or that isn't working. And it is that confidence now that we're looking for today, and is that governance that we're looking for today to have some level of, confidence that the HSA is on the right path.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the previous appointments, as has been mentioned in the past, were certainly before my time. However, I can assure you that during my tenure as the chairman of the board, we've confirmed qualifications, certainly for the CEO, which is the direct responsibility of the board. The other delegations, as far as the hiring of senior management, has been given to the CEO. As the board is not considered to be a working board where we get involved with operations, it would be hard for the board to simply state who should be hired or not hired for certain positions, as the CEO would have certainly a more intimate knowledge of the needs of the organization as opposed to the board members who meet once a month and on various subcommittees. Mr. Chairman, the CEO has been in her position for a number of years now. The current board of directors has taken a vote and has voted that they would continue with the current CEO, as we feel she is the person to lead the organization, and we wholeheartedly support her in this position. We've also made recommendations going forward for the CEO to bring on a position of COO to help her to be able to remove herself from some of the daily operational matters and allow her to focus on the strategic goals of the organization, of which she has brought on. And I can assure this honorable committee that indeed the COO is qualified for the position. and would be one that will continue to work along with the CEO to lead the HSA in the right direction. Mr. Chairman, also to further elaborate, the various positions, for example, the HR director has been taken under consideration by the HR subcommittee of the board, led by Carrie Bergstrom, director for HR, and she has provided training where needed support where needed for the HR director in order to get the training for the various members of the HR team to elevate the standard. And I can say, sir, within the last 2 years, we have seen a dramatic improvement in the function of the HR department at the HSA, and the subcommittee itself has worked very diligently to bring the entire organization training, which has been needed for many, many years. Mr. Chairman, this board of directors, sir, is one that ensures that the staff get the necessary support, where in the past I cannot say that has ever happened, as opposed to a board coming in and taking control. That's not what we're about. We are about making sure that the support is there to see the results that are needed. Sir, within the last year alone, the bad debt has been reduced drastically. It went from, and I can give you figures for this, it went to roughly from $15 million in 2016 to down to $7 million in 2017. So that's not political talk. That's actual figures that will be delivered.
Your certified accounts say that the total, but you're talking about annually?
Yes, sir. Year end, from year to year.
Because the accounts, the audited accounts say how 122 million.
Right, and in 2017, sir, when you get that report, it'll show that it's down to 108 million, and it will continue to decrease based on it. And I think we've justified the reason why the increase was due to adjudication processes, which we've now been able to resolve mostly. But what I'm saying is that the board has ensured that policies, procedures that needed to be put in place, that needed to be enforced, that needed to be given the support to the CEO to say when these policies and procedures are in place, the board will stand fast on these, and these are not something that we're going to waver on, or if we get outside influence on it, it is not something that we will bend to.
You just wavered. You have a bad debt policy that was propagated the 1st of July 2009, right? And given the submission from the chief executive officer, qualified, and as we were told earlier, that once something is placed as a bad debt based on this criteria, it should be written off. But yet the board is second guessing a request by the chief executive officer and the CFO following this policy with the patient financial services to write off debt and not writing it off because they believe they can collect it.
Mr. Chairman, through to you, sir. As I mentioned earlier, the bad debt policy is one that can be adjusted as necessary. And the wavering I was referring to was not in regards to a policy or procedure, but in regards to outside influence on that policy and procedure. If the board reviews and sees that we need to make adjustments, we will have to do so. The finance director at the time that was on the board reviewed the bad debt and did accept it, a portion of it based on his experience, and that the 6-year statute of limitations was something that we could not pursue further.
Is there an amended bad debt policy that post dates 1st of July 2009?
Sir.
That's what we've been. This is what is presented to this committee as the bad debt policy of the HSA. If you're now telling me that there exist amendments to this document that we have not been informed about,
Mr. Chairman, there are no amendments per se to the policy as such. There would be in that policy where it states that it can be reviewed by the management or board of the organization.
Mr. Chairman, if I may add, I think what has changed within the last couple of years is actually our payment policy. As you know, prior to the last few years, persons coming to the Health Service Authority was seen, and then later on the charges were pursued. That now has changed where we actually request, we make sure that we request the means of payment up front unless it's an emergency. And the other thing that we haven't really explored in the past is really taking our debtors, our bad debtors, through the court system. And we believe, in consultation with the board, we believe that with this more stringent practice now, that we will actually see an improvement in the way that our debtors are actually responding to the requests that we make for payments of these old debt. And I think that that is something that the board has been, very diligent on in the recent years.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I'm listening to I'm reading the law, and I'm listening to the comments of the chairperson. And maybe I'm a freshman, Emily, Mr. Chairman, so maybe you can help me. What is the provision for someone who has a legal requirement by law to delegate that responsibility to someone if the law does not basically say that they have that? I'm looking at the section 15, port employee staff at the HSA, which is something that's given to the board. And the truth of the fact is, when I see that section 3 says the board shall also determine the professional qualification and requirements of the employees of the authority and personnel under contracts for services with the authority, the terms and conditions of employment and contracts for services, medical staff structure, so forth and so on. The thing about it is, Mr. Chairman, where this breakdown has happened is that the board or previous boards decided to allow people on the job training to develop themselves into the roles, and then basically left them unsupervised to some extent. And successive board have just come on and have perpetuated the issue. Because the reality of it is, Mr. Tibbetts, is that you can't put someone to develop in the role and then say the board can't do this or that on a day-to-day basis when the law is clear, there's a board requirements. 2, you have basically people who are in a trainee role in a very senior organization. And let's be clear here. We're talking about an hospital. It's a $100 million institution with probably the most PhDs or doctorates inside the entire civil service. This is not a party shop. This is a place where it's big business. I mean, the expenditures alone is a good chunk of the government's annual expenses each year. And to be having key positions in a more trainee role and in a board now that is basically delegating its own responsibilities to people who are in a trainee role is really smacks of bad governance. And the issue for us now as legislators in this House, we need to now ask ourselves the question, are these statutory authorities that we set up, are they now doing the purpose that they're intended to do? Because this is really now the crux now for us as legislators, whereas we have built these authorities, we have created them, and we have just basically allowed them to just run off, and there's almost like no accountability. What I was looking for, Mr. Tibbetts, was more from a governance standpoint, rather than, this is what management is doing and we're fully on. And I think this is really where the issue is, because when I find a board and a management too much in sync, the question is then, where is the governance? Where is the checks? Where is the accountability? The questions that we are asking are the questions that the board is supposed to be asking by law. It is not something that we should be just addressing for in this committee. And this is the conversation now that we need to take with the minister and the Ministry of Health in terms of what governance model is there. We have already had a chief officer who has already come in and basically said that, it's an authority, they're free to do what they want. And now the board is basically saying, this is the culture at the HSA that needs to stop. There is no way, when you look at what is required in terms of qualification of board members, this law is one of the very few laws that basically states the qualification required for board members. And the truth of the fact is the board members them have been tardy in their governance of the various subcommittees and the people that they should be managing. The finance alone speaks for itself. Where the Auditor General, the amount of adjustments that had to be made on the statutory accounts for the HSA before it could have even got a qualified opinion. In essence, the Auditor General did the work. There are no internal controls. You're hiring consultants to do that. I mean, there's got to be some level and something as basic as even a job description. You sent one for the HR post, but something as simple as a job description for a CFO, we can't even get at this committee level. I mean, what confidence should we take away from this today?
I think to answer your question, I don't think anybody who has a statutory responsibility to perform a function can delegate that responsibility. They can delegate the authority to somebody else to do it, but they still retain the responsibility and the accountability in law in order to see that it has been done, even if they delegate the authority for somebody to do it. They cannot delegate the responsibility that the statute sets up.
Mr. Chairman, through you, sir, to address the members' questions regarding whether the board has questioned this, I think the minutes over the last 3 years will show that the board has questioned on many occasions the various positions, qualifications through the subcommittees, through the board level itself. So these are questions that are not new to us. Perhaps they're being new to the public through this forum.
We accept that the board has questioned. What has the board done about it? Because we're still looking at 2016 accounts with the same problems of 2015, with the same problems of 2014, with the same problems of 2013, with the same problems going back.
Mr. Chairman, through you, sir, as I mentioned, the HR director, Ms. Carrie Bergstrom, has put in place numerous actions and action plans.
And these are all policy documented that was handed to the CEO by the HR subcommittee of the board.
Pardon? Could you repeat that, sir?
These are all policy positions taken by the HR subcommittee of the board that were given to the chief officer of the organization in writing.
That would be correct, sir, and they would be carried out and then reported back on.
Why have they not been implemented?
They have been, sir, and that's what I'm telling you. You're looking at a data that is a year and a half.
Okay, in the case of the HR, you said they have been implemented. Why were they not implemented when it was done by the financial subcommittee? Because you can't tell me that the financial subcommittee issued instructions that were implemented and we still get accounts that require $50 million in corrections by the Auditor General.
Mr. Chairman, through you, sir, you're looking at data that is a year and a half old. So the implementations don't turn around overnight. It has been going in the right direction. As the CEO mentioned, we were about 85% compliant with the report that was provided by Deloitte. The additional changes, sir, would show that the organization is in the right path and will deliver a clean opinion for 2018.
You say that you keep referring to this 80 and 80+% compliant. Why did you hire a consultant in the first place?
Sir, I think the CEO has answered that question for you in regards to...
I don't think so.
Okay, well, the CEO, the consultant was brought on to provide the fine tuning or adjustments that needed to be in order to...
We have gotten representation from Deloitte saying that what has been said here or what they were supposed to do was not what they were consulted to do. They were not consulted to fine-tune anything. They were simply consulted to find the problems, and you were going to hire somebody else to find the solutions and to implement them.
Sir, if 85% of what was in place was being done correctly, the other 15% is what I would consider to be fine-tuning as far as identifying the areas where the adjustments were needed. I don't know if that clarifies it for you. The recommendations from Deloitte were taken into consideration and put into 2 phases, which began implementing immediately in order to make the deadline of a 2018 clean opinion.
Keep hearing that promise, right?
Sir, I will deliver on that. That is not going to be a promise. That is a certainty.
There's a good possibility that I will still be chairman of PAC.
Yes, sir. I will be glad to put that report on your desk, sir.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. And one of the things I want to point out is, if memory serves me correct, one of the few government agencies or statutory bodies that apply for work permits through via immigration is actually the Cayman Monetary Authority. As a past member of the Business Staff and Plan Board, I remember seeing them coming through the application process. And one of the things I want to read, and this is where the issue is, because at a private company, and at a company in the private sector, employed people who were not qualified in the role and gave them a job over qualified Caymanians, and then that would have been an issue. One of the things I just want to read for members here is the declaration that must be signed by every single employer in the private sector when they're applying for a permit or for someone who's not Caymanian in a role. And I read it says, I declare the information contained in this application to be correct to the best of my knowledge and belief, and I am aware that it is a criminal offense to make a statement or representation that is false in a material fact which I know to be false or do not believe to be true. This is the standard in which we are holding the private sector in this country too, where it is a criminal offense to make a small, just to apply for a work permit. It's a criminal offense to make a false statement. And when I'm looking at some of these rules here within the HSA and recognizing now that there's literally nothing to be held with, the question is, why isn't even the permits at the HSA similar to SEMA, who's actually going through the business staff and plan board, where at least somebody is vetting the iron policies or something else to make sure that people who should be given opportunities are given opportunities? Why is the HSA an authority being held at a different standard than even the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, which is another authority of government? I mean, these are the kind of checks and balances, and the reality of it is that the overall iron practice within the HSA is a serious problem where the public is concerned. And based on just looking at three positions here, three senior positions, where at its inception, they weren't qualified for the role, but granted, we gave them a chance, and I support giving Caymanians a chance to improve themselves. But at the same time, the board, and this is where the board is supposed to bring the expertise in to basically guide the senior management in terms of where the direction and everything else. I mean, this is what the law states. And it appears from listening here that is more like the management that is guiding the board other than the way around. And this is a serious governance issue. And where politics is concerned, I think we need to start really looking now at some of these authorities that we have set up. Some of these authorities that we have set up to see if they're really fulfilling the purpose in which that they started out or they set out to fulfill. But we need to get the HSA back on track. This is going on now for too long.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I can assure you that the management is not guiding the board as far as the decisions and directives of the board. The board is making the decisions, and the management is responsible for carrying out those decisions when it comes to the policies and procedures of the organization. In no way does the management tell the board what is going to happen. We may, of course, at any time gain insight from management as needed because of the complexity of a situation, perhaps. However, if we feel as though we need to contact them, that is what happens. The board does not and will not be taking directions from management. I can assure you, as I've said, in the last 2 years, you would have seen and you will note that there is a turnaround as far as the organization goes in regards to the hiring procedures, as far as the training goes, and so forth. The board has taken complete control of the organization as far as the role and responsibilities of the board and the board members and subcommittees as such of the board of directors.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, since your time there, Mr. Tibbetts, as chairperson of the board, how many disciplinary actions have you dealt with, roughly?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't be able to give the exact number. However, there have been a number of disciplinary actions that I have been involved with regarding the dismissal of employees, as well as letters of warning and so forth regarding various employees in the organization.
So just so we're clear then, Mr. Chairman, the board is involved with the dismissal or the discipline of staff, but the board isn't involved with their hiring.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the discipline and so forth would be related directly to employees of the board. Those are certain individuals within their responsibility. As far as the involvement goes, it would be an awareness of employees and so forth at certain management levels being dismissed, not the fact that the board would write a specific letter to the employee saying that they are being dismissed. We again delegate the authority for that to the CEO and her team.
I just want to remind you, Mr. Chairman, section 15, 3D, disciplinary, the board shall also determine the disciplinary procedures for employees of and for persons under contract for services within the authority. Again, sir, that is something for the board, that even though you may delegate the day-to-day run of it, responsibility still remains with the board. And we have yet convinced that the board has employed the level of governance required as required by the law in managing the HSA. And that is pretty much what it is that we're looking for today. And I'm open, at least by the end of this session, we'll have some level, both the committee and for the public as a whole.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add there, the board puts in place the broad strategic policy direction, and as far as recruitment and disciplinary matters, any HR matter for that fact is contained in our HR manual, which the board approved when that was put in place.
Right. Mr. Chairman, just to support that statement, I think if the member looks at the subsection of the law, it would state that we are responsible for it, and as the CEO has mentioned, it is certainly something that the board has approved as far as the policy and procedure in regards to disciplinary matters.
I'm not going to be as long because Mr. Saunders has covered 3 of my listed questions. But the first one I would like to ask, I've asked other HR people, it's a standard procedure to keep an individual on 4 years of temporary. Can't hear anyone else doing it, except by the HSC. Has been done to 2 Caymanians. There's a feeling in the public, there's a feeling at the hospital that if you happen to be an indigenous Caymanian, it's a strike against you when it comes to dealing with the HR. Just to let you know what the what the perception is. One night at a function, a doctor who, I think the individual retired, said, and I quote, "At the HSA, incompetence and sloppiness are seen as virtues once you are my friend and you are not brighter than me." The only prayer, because I wrote it down afterward, is that Mrs. Yearwood will interfere and save us from 2 sections of that hospital. I went on to ask which 2 sections. It is so amusing that the 2 sections that have been questioned the most here happen to be the 2 sections. The last time we went here, we asked for a few documents to be delivered. We were told that they would be delivered. There's one that I noticed that has not been, and that was the question, how often are the units deep cleaned and ventilation cleaned? Is there a set schedule, and can you show documentation the schedule has been followed? That's the one thing we have not received as yet.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the member. The request has been put forth to the various departments, and they were supposed to deliver that to you. I will ensure that that is delivered to you today, because there is a schedule and there is compliance to sign off on each of those. So I have put the request forward. The CEO can confirm that, but we will deliver that today if it has not been delivered as yet.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add, I have seen the response, but I guess with all of the others that had been sent forward, maybe that one got missed, but that was actually in place. So we'll make sure that that arrives today.
Mr. Chairman, through you. Mr. Saunders has stated here on a few occasions, I will repeat, business as usual will not continue. Mr. Saunders also read what the law says about the hiring. And I do say to the chairman, I'm 150% sure you have not run, whichever the correct word you want to use, the bracken light, power business, like the way, or allowed your HR people to run it the way that's going on at the HSA. I do think it's time for the board to take a close look at HR. It's in the law that you can, and it's high time that you yourself take and put your finger on this section. I am not strong into the finances, except when you tell me you're going to spend $5 million to collect $1 million, then I can understand that. That doesn't make much sense. Those things like that. But I leave those sections of the questioning to the more learned experts. When it comes to dealing with human beings and my Caymanians, I step in. That's where a lot of people talk to me in confidence. And I'm telling you, sir, that there's a lot to be desired, especially for our people. I have documented instances where requests in writing have been put forward to advance themselves. And yet, when you look at who's advanced, the words that's used, oh, they got papers. Mr. Tibbetts, sir, please put your finger on this section of the HSC, because it has come time that our people have to stop being put at the back and applications and so forth because they're not friends, because they don't go to the same church, because they're not from the same country. These things have got to stop. At the end of the day, a lot of people can leave here and go home because they still call where they come from home even though they have papers. The indigenous Caymanians cannot leave and go anywhere. And if they are willing, if they are able, and if they are competent, they must be given a fair shake. Please.
Mr. Chairman, through you, to speak to this particular point, the board of directors, myself in person, has requested from the HR subcommittee a report of Caymanians being hired and being replaced. And there is a plan that for every time there is a position available that a Caymanian must be hired for that position once the qualifications are met. I can assure you that has been put in place now for about 18 months. That is a directive that has been issued from the board of directors to the senior management, and they must bring that report to the board of directors at its meeting to notify the board on the Caymanians within the position. I can also assure the member that any Caymanian, if I am made aware of it, without question, that has been taken up as far as ensuring training, and as far as ensuring that a fair opportunity to be given above anybody else as far as the position is concerned. Any Caymanian is at the forefront of my agenda to promote them and to see them excel. Mr. Chairman, there are many instances in the organization where young Caymanians have come in, and as Mr. Saunders has alluded to, we have taken them and we have trained them and we are bringing them up through the ranks. I think that is something that the HSA should be proud of. It is something perhaps that we're not telling the story well enough to the public for, but it is something that I have sat down with the CEO in just this last few weeks alone to say to her, this is a story that we need to tell. We need to get out into the public. The number, the tens and perhaps hundreds of those that have come up, Caymanians that have come up through the organization that we are continuing to support, that we are continuing to provide training and education and certifications for, that the public has no idea of. And I think of young Caymanians just out of high school, in college, who come to work for the organization. The CEO has taken them under her wing to say, listen, we want you in this organization. We want you to be the future of the organization. Here's where my suggestion would be for you to go as far as your education is concerned. And they have taken that advice very seriously, following through on it. And we have a number of Caymanians, young Caymanians, indigenous Caymanians that are coming through the ranks, and they are being trained, they're being qualified. And in the future, when you and I are long gone, we look to these young Caymanians to be the future of the organization, just as someone took the opportunity to bring the current ones through the system. And we continuously, it is never a board meeting that goes by without the board of directors saying, where is the report on the Caymanians? And the CEO delivers the report as to the Caymanians that are hired, the number of foreigners that had to be hired because there were no Caymanians available for the position, and then the HR subcommittee bringing the training necessary for the Caymanians to replace the foreigners that were hired. We do not give long-term contracts to foreigners because the idea would be to replace them with the Caymanian in the position. Sorry, not to cut you, Mr. Chairman. Also, I don't want to seem as though we don't appreciate those that have had to come in to be in positions through the years because of their qualifications. However, the fact is that we are promoting and we continue to promote and educate and train our Caymanians first and foremost, without a question. That has been the number one goal of this board of directors.
Mr. Chairman, through you. This is not at the top level where you've had to bring in people with qualifications that we don't have. This is nothing whatsoever to do with that level. But last time you all were here, and I questioned another one of your members on what was the feeling of money being allocated or training of Caymanian doctors now going through the Education Council, which I think it should be removed and put. And I went back and did some homework. Health Practitioners Law, Section 21(1)(d)(3). Councils which shall regulate the training requirements of registered practitioners in the island. Because those people on the Education Board, they don't know nothing, the difference between an artery and a vein, most of them. This is something that maybe you as a chairman can push forward and say, we need our own budget to train doctors, train nurses, train them properly, and they come through. Well, I'm not so sure going through with the people who are doing the hiring there now. But maybe it should be a board set up with all medical people, that because we have young people. Right now we have a young man who sat in this chair during Youth Parliament, went off and came back. Went off to some, did his prerequisites to some university, topped the honors. Now he's back and sitting, waiting, because he couldn't get a scholarship to study, to be a doctor. Luckily, we have a young lady who was in Liverpool who was very fortunate to have the Christy Thompson and two other private people that are not associated help her with money for her to do her studies. All young Caymanians who are bright and sharp. There's something that maybe you, the board authority, should say to government. Instead of putting this 5 or 6 million there, give it to us directly so we can say, well, okay, we need surgeons, we need a heart specialist, we need an oncologist. And if any of these people, the money's there for you to train to this level or whatever, you guys will have it. I know you say the person said, oh, you meet in consultation, but this here gives you the law, gives you the power to do it. It should be with you guys.
Mr. Chairman, through you, if I can just add to what the board chairman was saying, the HSA is committed to be able to provide opportunities for Caymanians to join the workforce. And this is actually demonstrated in the percentage of Caymanians that we have working at the HSAs, close to 60%. And that is recognizing the fact that we have many healthcare professionals that we need to recruit from overseas. But having said that, one of the things that the board has done through us is to ensure that we designate certain entry-level positions as available for Caymanians only. And we don't distinguish between Caymanians who are indigenous or are Caymanians through the immigration process. But we actually do a lot of other things to outreach to Caymanians who are perhaps interested or haven't even determined whether or not they're interested in entering healthcare professions. And I think we can see that with the amount of persons that are now pursuing doctors, nurses. We also have a lot of other healthcare professionals that are studying in the fields. Forensic science, for example, is one that has become quite popular in the recent times. We also do a lot of other outreach through the school career fairs. We actually have a summer internship program. This year we had over 70 students come through the program. And those are at various levels. They could be at high school where they're contemplating whether they would go off to study in a healthcare field, or they may already be in school And we want to keep them close. We want to be able to mentor them as they go through their training process. In fact, just recently I was contacted by a member of the National Workforce Development Agency as well, requesting if we would partner with them in order to provide internships for local Caymanians who they will actually fund through the training program to be able to provide internship placement. So, if we were to do that, then we would have more Caymanians coming into the workforce. So there are a number of things that we're doing. There are a number of strategies that are in place. And I do want to personally thank yourself as well as the chairman in recent past for the advocacy and support that you've had in regards to the specialist training of Caymanian doctors, because we are seeing an influx into the profession as far as medicine is concerned, but we don't want them to stop just with their initial training. We want them to go on to develop into the specialist areas. And I can tell you that our board and this government has taken that seriously, the discussions that we've had in the past, and I believe that you will see that reflected in the upcoming budget, where priority is being placed in regards to scholarships for Caymanian doctors to become trained as specialists. Having said that, though, as far as the education process is concerned, just to clarify, even though that scholarship program remains in a different ministry, every time a profession or an individual approaches the scholarship board for training in any healthcare field, we are actually approached by the scholarship secretariat to participate in that interview process. So I know the medical director, as well as the chief nursing officer and the chief dental officer, have all participated in that interview process. However, I do acknowledge the recommendations that have been made going forward, and I believe that further discussion will come out for the next budget.
Mr. Chairman, let me wrap up now. This is my last one. Through you, Mr. Chairman. It's one thing the Honorable Anthony Eden taught me. Don't ask a question unless you have an answer. And a lot of good things are said, but it's not practiced. Because I know what I had to personally pick up the phone and call a medical institute because I happened to know someone through sports who was happened to know the Minister of Health in that country. And what that individual who's from Cayman had to go through with the scholarship people here. So regardless of who you all send or whatever, something's still not connected. Regardless of what you all say, it's not connecting. Because I saying a local person take their own money, have to fly out of this country and spend their own money, stay in a hotel to go stand at the front of the institute to talk to the person to get in because of our people here. But anyhow, human nature. It just so happens that both of you happen to be from the BRAC. Because the reason I'm saying this piece, Mrs. Yearwood, is that you wish, is that human nature takes over sometime. If you grew up in the same community with an individual and their qualifications are just the same or a little bit below an individual who's from someplace else, you will most likely go to the person who you grew up with because of the comfort level, the ability to communicate. Everything is much something you're used to. When you said about the part about you don't notice whether it's indigenous or by paper, neither do I. But the fact is, a lot of people who are making decisions are not indigenous, and they're not giving the indigenous a chance even when they're the same. They're bringing people from their own locality or people within their circle of friends and so forth. And that is what is being said, and that is what I am waiting until the health improves or the HR people later, when they come back here, for me to unleash the rest of my facts. Because this should not fall at the CEO, at your level, because you have enough work to do except micromanaging people. Yes, sometimes you have to step in. That's why when the law was read, they have a lot of authority in the hiring, just as they get involved in the firing. So that's the point I want to get clear. It's nothing about anti-anyone. It's about pro-Caymanian. It seems to be a bad thing in this country the minute someone stands up for Caymanians, and especially those who have to be indigenous. But the fact is, when certain individuals have gotten their Caymanian papers, they're only Caymanian when it's convenient, but they still continue to bring their clique of friends and their connections at the expense of the indigenous. So that is what's not fair. It's not anti-anyone. So thank you very much, and I appreciate you all, especially on the part. Look carefully again, Mr. Chairman, about the taking over of the section of Herb Caymanian people having to go through another board to get their scholarship money or get off to study medicine. Education and health are the two things that we have allowed to get out of hand in this country. It's time to straighten both of them up.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Bush, for your words there. In regards to the education, Mr. Chairman, there's only a certain amount of money that the government allocates for funding for particular fields, and I can only assume that perhaps this particular young Caymanian fell, unfortunately, just on the outlier of that. I would like to say, though, however, not knowing who the individual is that the member is referring to, that we do have a number of well-qualified, well-educated, well-trained Caymanians that are going through the process, through the scholarship board, in order to get their qualifications and to return and work at the HSA, because they know that the attitude and the atmosphere at the HSA has changed in recent times as far as promoting the Caymanians and starting with the idea of putting Caymanians first in all areas, not just the front lines, but also as far as our doctors go. A report was given by the medical director not long ago that we actually have more Caymanians training right now to become doctors than we've ever had in the history of the Cayman Islands. And the majority of them, almost every single one of them, want to return and work at the HSA. And I think that is...
But he's talking numerical, not percentage.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. But the facts remain that the
Big difference.
well, the facts remain that the people return qualified for the positions, and we give them the experience necessary to meet their final requirements, and also then encourage them to go on to do the specializations as the CEO has mentioned. And that's certainly something that we can't let our doctors return with base level qualifications and think that they are that's the end of their education. We encourage them, we push them. I'll never forget hearing, sir, that a young Caymanian wanted to become a nurse, a pediatric nurse. And one of the people on the panel that sat there said, "Why are you stopping at that and not going on to be a doctor?" And that has always sparked me and my interest in pushing our young Caymanians to not just become a doctor. Where's your specialization? Is it in cardiology or whatever the specialization may be? And that is something our medical director, our CEO, continues to push our Caymanians to the next level when it comes to specialization, and as well as our all of our staff from the very entry right through to our top level doctors.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Tibbetts, are you aware of any administrative work for the HSA, administrative level work for the HSA being done overseas?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I am not aware of administrative level other than perhaps surveys being done overseas. We have contracted an organization that deals with patient satisfaction and contacting patients and so forth. And they put the numbers together. We benchmark that against other hospitals in the region, and that would be why it would be done by an overseas company. That's the only knowledge I have or I can recollect of overseas administrative work.
Well, through you, Mr. Chairman, this is something I would like for Mr. Tibbetts to look into. There's an employee at the HSA who I understand has filed for U.S. papers, and as a result, I had to move to the U.S. That is still employed by the HSA, working remotely, and basically getting paid. Now, if someone needs to move to the U.S. to get their U.S. papers, at a minimum, I would think that kind of job should have just passed on to somebody, as opposed to having someone overseas working remotely on doing coding or whatever within the HSA.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I am not aware of that particular situation, other than to say an employee who, for medical purposes, had to relocate for a period of time to the U.S. to deal with mental health issues of her particular
Well,
child, but is now back in Grand Cayman and working at the organization. That is the only person I could think of, and that is not through. That did not come through the board level. That's just happening to know the person outside of the organization. But I cannot say, and maybe the member can speak to me offline to indicate who he's referring to. And I will certainly look into that situation, because that is not something that we promote at all.
I'll give you the information offline, Mr. Tibbetts. Don't worry about that. And the other issue too, and you see, it is the culture within the HR section that is becoming an issue, where you have had employees who have left the HSA, resigned, but now if they need a job letter to get something, a loan from a bank or so forth. You see, these are the kind of things that are happening at the HSA, Mr. Tibbetts, that you need to be aware of. And I can assure you that we are now in the business, and I will say that's politician, of stuff appearing on our windshield. So I understand where Mr. Miller is coming from with information. And it is that deep-seatedness that needs to be dealt with. That, and I can tell you right now, it is not only the HSA, because I guarantee you when Finance Committee comes around, there are a lot of questionable hirings inside the civil service itself that I guarantee you, as night follow day, that we'll be bringing out also within the light. But I want to read something here to you, Mr. Tibbetts. I know we're running for time now. And I just want to make sure that you're aware of it. There's an old saying that says an error does not become a mistake until you fail to correct it. Miss Yearwood announced, well, she stated previously that she was not in place when the current CFO, it was not her decision with the current CFO. I'm just going to read to you the position summary of the CFO, just so we're clear and everyone is clear, and then also what it was that we ended up with, and I'm going to do the same so it is in the record. Job title, Chief Financial Officer. Department Finance reports to Chief Executive Officer. Position summary. Overall responsibility for strategic financial planning, internal and external financial reporting, timely billing and collections. Responsible for the strategic administration of procurement, patient financial services, and material management. The post holder is a shareholder for the budgeting, reporting, and financial authorization of the health services, recurrent budget of approximately CI 82 million. Works mostly on their own initiative, but is given general direction from the Chief Executive Officer. Plans, prioritize his own work schedule in order to achieve both long and short-term goals. Education, requires a bachelor's degree in accounting or finance with a master's degree preferred. Certification/licenses, must be a chartered accountant/certified public accountant or certified management accountant. Experience, must have at least 7 years of relevant work experience as an accounting or finance manager, preferably in the healthcare system. Work schedule status full-time. That is the requirement for the Chief Financial Officer of the HSA. This is what we hired. 2001 to 2003, Group Accountant Shipping Services Limited. And they are responsible for tax planning for a group of companies, monitoring the accounting functions for all 7 companies, preparing consolidated financial statements, liaison with external auditors and statutory regulatory institutions, treasury management for the group companies, supervision of companies' accountants, supervision of group's payroll department. That's what we got for $82 million hospital. And of course, a degree in economics and management. Turning to HR. So we're clear. This one's very long, which I'm grateful for. That is a proper. But basically, it asks for knowledge, master's degree in human resource management or healthcare administration or related field required, human resource leadership, executive education preferred, license certification, PHR or SPHR certification preferred. I think that stands for senior professional in HR, that's what the record. And experience, 8 to 10 years of previous experience in human resource management in a hospital or healthcare setting required. Broad knowledge and experience in employment law, compensation, organizational planning and development, employee relations, safety, and training. A proven track record of building and managing a successful customer service organization. And there's some additional job specific, which I won't get into. Here's what we hired. And I'm just going by what was submitted to the committee. And I'm a little bit lost on this resume, but it is what it is. Health Service Authority, 2004, February 2004 to October 2009. Manage human resource officer. Manage all staff activities such as recruitment, retention, and reparation of specifically assigned groups of employees. Now make a note of that date. February 2004 to October 2009. Then the next line up, Health Service Authority, Human Resource Supervisor. Led a team of 6 employees in the management all operational HR matters such as interpreting, administering contracts, conflict resolution, advising on appropriate employee corrective actions, establishing consistent hiring practices. The date of being a human resource supervisor was November 2000 to June 2010. So just for everyone listening, so from February 04 to October 09, they were a human resource officer. And then from November 2000, which is before that role, to June 2010, they were a human resource supervisor. And then, of course, July 2010 to March 2012, HR designate. First of all, I mean, the resume itself for the HR director, the dates didn't even match up. I mean, you're talking about basically a one-page resume with then a diploma in office administration and technology, and then a postgraduate certificate in HR management from University of Portsmouth, and then a master's in HR from University of Portsmouth. When you compare this to a Caymanian that applied for the role, and again, this is what was submitted to us. I'm just going to compare the two. 1994 to 1999, Florida State University, Tallahassee, Florida, Bachelor of Science in Community Health Education. 2000 to 2001, University of South Florida, Tampa, Florida, Master in Public Health Education promotion. 2003 to 2004, Portsmouth, England, certificate in thing there. This person managed was the HR manager, the training manager for one of the largest employers on the island. They had worked in government. They basically, when you look back, and I mean, I compared the two, and having known both individuals here, because I just want to state that I worked with Mrs. Riley when I started in government, so I'm familiar with Mrs. Riley, and actually I think personally she's a very nice person. I just want to state that. And also the other Caymanian that applied. I mean, I know her again equally, and she's also employed in government. It is this culture that when we send our young people off to go off, get the requisite experience, and also to some extent international experience too, based on what was sent through here. And then when you look at even the person's extracurricular activities, Cayman AIDS Foundation, past VP member, National Youth Policy Task Force member, National Gender Policy Task Force member, Together We Can HIV program, Rotary Club of Grand Cayman, David Foster Foundation, Mentoring Cayman, Labor Appeals Tribunal, Young Parents Program, Leading Edge High School, Meals on Wheels, Cayman Island Society Society of Human Resource Professional, member, Young Caymanian Leadership Award finalist, presiding officer. I mean, when you go through and you look at this resume compared to this resume, there is no way on God's green earth that someone can sit down and compare these two and then make this kind of selection. And it is this kind of the culture that not just within the HSA, but within government itself, and I guarantee you, that come next month with Finance Committee, there's going to be a weeping and a wailing and a national teeth for all of those people who have gone out and employed their friends, have employed their church friends, and they're this and that, because I'm going to tell you, it needs to stop. And unfortunately, just that the HSA is the one who's taking center stage today. But Mr. Tibbetts, I am begging you, sir, take control of your HR and your finance function as required by the law. Please, sir, I'm begging you.
Mr. Chairman, through you, I can assure the member that as the chairman of the board, I have taken full control within what the law allows to have charge over the HR and all portions of the HSA. I'll let the CEO speak to it some more. However, I do note that in reference to the CFO, for example, the CFO was a chartered accountant from 1999, certainly well before the date that she was hired. Although I, of course, was not around at that time, and I cannot speak to the mindset or the thought process behind why she was hired in the position. That is certainly on record, and I think you have been provided with that information as far as the short list goes, and also a justification at the time of why 4 prior CFOs have not or did not stay with the organization. I'll also make note that I think a CFO designate had been attempted to be hired several years ago to replace the CFO, and I don't think that that's not replace, but to eventually come into to work as that position. So I guess it would be replaced, but that person did not stay with the organization either. So I think it speaks highly to the CFO, the fact that she is dedicated to the organization, and certainly her qualifications will speak for themselves. I don't think that that there would ever been a hire where she could say that she was hired without the qualification necessary as a chartered accountant.
Mr. Chairman, through you, sir, to Mr. Tibbetts, we had asked the information to be provided
Yes, sir.
concerning the job advertisement. None was provided. And I can tell you, looking back at what has happened in 2005, this was a selection process. This was not an hiring process. And until then, till now, we have not asked. And the reality of it is, you talk about being qualified in 1999. The reality of it is, the person only had one accountant job prior to that. The person was not employed from August 2003 when they arrived on island as a dependent on their husband's work permit, who was also an employee at the HSA. Did 21 months, the person basically did nothing, and then was just brought into the HSA to work. There was no recruitment process back then for this position. And that is the reality. And this is the reason why when we asked for this information, it could not be provided. The person, and thus when I go back, as Mrs. Yearwood has distanced herself from the decision, which is fine. If it's not her, she didn't make it, she didn't make it. Thus the reason I said, an error does not become a mistake until you fail to correct it. And the reality of it is, where now is the advertisement to even show that the HSA was serious about even employing someone? Yes, you acquire, I think it was back in 2010, I believe that you may have recruited someone where offer was made and the person chose something else. But that was 7 years ago, sir. And the reality of it is, when are we going to put a Caymanian into that role?
Mr. Chairman, since that time, there was a young Caymanian that was hired for the position and worked in it for a number of years. So I'm not sure where the member is missing the information here. However, maybe we
the person was the CFO designate, and then the person, another role came up in government that the person took, and that's
Yes,
fine.
sir.
So the question is then what happened to the recruitment process since then? I mean, the reality of it is, based on this person's resume, I can tell you right now, there are many Caymanians that have a far better resume than when this person entered the role. And the question is, what is being done now from a recruitment standpoint to get a Caymanian in that role?
Mr. Chairman, through you, after that time, the particular person in question, the CFO, got
NPR.
papers. Yes, and so that would be why the position was not pursued further to be replaced by a Caymanian.
So now that the person, so the question is this then, if the person has PR and have now basically done the job, then why is the requirement then a bachelor's degree in accounting or finance when the person still does not have the requisite degree? The person has a degree in economics and management. So in essence, you're asking for a requirement that the person still doesn't have. You might as well just amend the job description then to suit the profile, which would be consistent to what many other companies do on Ireland.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, the person, the CFO, is an ACCA qualified person for the position, which would speak to the fact that she has a accounting qualification. I can't say specifically the date of that qualification, other than she's been an ACCA qualified since 1999. But in regards to the undergrad degree, I can't speak specifically to when
Well, no,
that
but
would have been.
through you, Mr. Chairman, the reality of it is you ask for 3 requirements and the person only has 1. And if that is the case, then why ask for 3? The person only meets 1.
Mr. Chairman, through you, I can't speak, like I said, to why this person was selected at the time. I can say that the qualification for being an accountant is there as far as the certification goes. And a young Caymanian had been brought in and filled the position for a number of years. They took a job somewhere else in government, and during that time, the CFO did receive her papers, and therefore the post was.
but I-
Sorry,
just
just so we're clear, sorry, Mr. Chairman, I wrap up with this, just clear this point. There are 4,550 thereabouts, give or take a few hundred, people on Ireland with about work permits. Could be about close to the 5,000, sorry, with permanent residency, with 5,000. Are we basically just saying that once a person becomes a permanent residency, that a job that is required for a Caymanian, that a PR now qualifies to replace a person, a Caymanian? Is that now the what it is that we were to take away from your statement, sir?
Mr. Chairman, through you, that is not what I stated, and I certainly would not promote that, Mr. Chairman. I've said it to the other members, and I'll restate it, that I am Caymanian first and foremost, above anything else, that all my staff that have anything to do with the HSA, we are promoting and we continue to support and train and develop our Caymanians first and foremost. That is what I stated, and I will continue to state that, and that is what we actually put into practice. What I am saying is that because permanent residency was acquired during this time, Caymanian was not sought per se actively to replace her at that time. Not to say that that will not happen in the future. However, there are plans in place as far as the particular position goes with delivering certain outputs, and once those are not met, then of course we would look at a replacement. However, thus far the outputs have been met by the CFO, and we're continuing to give the support.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, just so we're clear, and I just want it for the record, you're basically saying now that because the person has PR, you're no longer interested in finding a Caymanian for the role.
No, sir. Mr. Chairman, what I'm saying is that because the person has the PR, because they're in the position, because they are more intimate with the organization, and we are striving towards a clean opinion for 2018, to bring somebody else in at this point in time in the organization would disrupt and therefore absolutely confirm that it would be next to impossible for us to deliver a clean opinion, because the outputs that have been requested by the CFO are being delivered. We do feel confident that in 2018 we will deliver a clean opinion to this honorable House, and that the CFO is an integral part of delivering that clean opinion at this time.
Mr. Chairman, let the record show that, and this is where the private sector criticizes the government the most, is that once a person has attained PR, the interest of finding a Caymanian in the role basically becomes non-existent.
But I have a more fundamental question. Are you, as chairman, saying that you are satisfied with the performance appraisal of your CFO when the Auditor General has to forget the 105? We accept that some of it, but that some percentage of that, almost 50% of that, was due to property reevaluation. But you're saying that you're satisfied with the CFO, that when you call in, the auditor has to table, and the auditor has to table some $50 million out of $100 million budget in corrections, you're satisfied with the performance and the accounts that your chief financial officer has produced?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what I am saying is that the chief financial officer has been given specific outputs that must be delivered to the board of directors. If at any time these outputs have not been met, then at that time the evaluation will take place as to whether they are capable or incapable of the
One of those
particular
outputs
positions.
obviously was not accurate accounts.
Mr. Chairman, I can't speak to what happened with previous boards as far as their requirements of the CFO. I can speak to what my board of directors is delivering.
Okay,
and one of those things that will be delivered will be a clean opinion. And if for any reason the CFO does not deliver that, at that time, of course, we will be
You're in a hot seat now. You
seeking
have
to-
accounts that was delivered for 2016 that needed close to 50% of the actual accounting corrected by the Auditor General staff. Are you satisfied that that is a performance of a chief financial officer that you can accept?
Mr. Chairman, I can say that I am satisfied that as of the years going forward, once the plan has been put in place, I came in basically as chairman in late 2014, and at that point in time, the financial years were running differently, as you well know, and therefore it would not have been time to turn around the finances for 15 and 16. However, I can say that during that time, procedures and policies were put in place and expectations were put in place of the CFO in order to allow her to deliver to the board of directors the clean opinion for 2018. So I can say that based on what the recommendations have been for the organization, from the board of directors for the organization, the CFO has delivered on those expectations.
You were appointed in 2014, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
The accounts that we are currently dealing with is from July the 1st, 2015 to June the 30th, 2016. That's during your administration.
Yes, sir, that's correct. But as I stated, there were policies and procedures that were put in place during that time. As you well know, sir, you would not come into an organization and day one turn everything around. There are things that have to be changed, and it takes time to make some changes. Therefore, for 2017, I can say that the procedures, the policies that were put in place by this board of directors under my leadership would have taken or begin to take shape in the fact that we were able to bring down some of the audit points, and now for 2018 we will be delivering a clean opinion to the board, to the House.
You're satisfied that it takes a year and a half to correct policies, particularly in the financial realm of the Health Services Authority?
Mr. Chairman, through you, sir, and with the entire history of the HSA, it has taken 12 years, sir, to get to the point where we are now going to be able to deliver a clean opinion. The fact that we have turned it around in a matter of a year and a half, I think that speaks extremely well of the board and the CEO in particular. The fact that 12 prior years, no one was able to do it. However, we will be able to do that in this coming year. I think that should speak very well of itself.
Okay.
But the person has been there for 12 years.
Yes, sir. Through you, Mr. Chairman, that may well be the case. However, sometimes it takes the right chief to deliver the product. And so I feel that this board will be the one that delivers the actual clean opinion to this honorable House, and I will let that speak for itself.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, I think based on what the member read as far as the CV for the CFO is concerned, I think there may have been a page that was missing. So I will undertake to resend that entire document so you can have it on record.
Okay. A very practical question. Let's take ambulance services. You have a number of Caymanians employed in ambulance services. You have a number of non-Caymanians employed in ambulance service. A Caymanian shows up qualified to U.S. standards, applies for a job, what happens?
Mr. Chairman, if there's a vacancy for the position, the Caymanian would be interviewed and would be taken on board. Whenever there's Caymanians who are qualified for those positions, there's no question.
Okay. The only statutory legislation that I'm aware of that defines who jobs are for in the Cayman Islands is the immigration law. And it says all jobs are for Caymanians. So if you don't happen to have a vacancy, although you have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 non-Caymanians in the position, the Caymanian is not employed and they're left unemployed until a vacancy comes up sometime in the future.
Mr. Chairman, I think you appreciate that, when the person comes out of school with a qualification, there needs to be an orientation program in order to orient them into that job. And we've done that in a number of areas where the individual might not be able to hit the ground running because they don't have experience, but we mentor them, as in the case of the ambulance services.
You just said the person is told there's no vacancy. They're turned away.
I'm saying that they would not have been hired into a position if a position wasn't available. But what we would do are other things in order to get them on board, to get them the experience that they need in order to be able to take on a position. So in the case of the EMS service, there's a ride-along program where they will be able to work with the EMS team and do ride-alongs in order to be able to get the necessary experience. But I am not aware of any position or any person who's come back with the qualifications that have not been given the opportunity to work in the EMS service, because as far as I'm aware, there are some vacancies in that area now. So much so that we have actually done training programs for the EMS service so we can train EMTs in order to take on positions. And we did that just probably about 3 years ago in the Sister Islands, and that yielded a number of qualified EMTs to be able to take on positions.
Maybe I just selected a bad one. The last time you were here, you confirmed that certain employees work 12-hour shifts. Does that 12 hours include a paid lunchtime?
The 12 hours includes a lunch break, yes.
Which they're paid for?
That is not included in their full hours, I don't believe.
So if the person, if they work 12 hours and they don't get a lunch, they're not paid for lunchtime, they're actually only paid for 11 hours.
I would need to go back and see exactly how that is, that
Okay.
schedule template is rolled out.
And if they are expected to get a lunchtime during that 12 hours because they're not paid for it, they're only paid for 11 hours, what happens if they don't get that lunchtime?
Mr. Chairman,
Do they get overtime?
I have to go back and look and see exactly how that is implemented.
Is there a regular occurrence where your supervisors are authorized to alter time cards of employees?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, sir?
Is there any instance where any of your supervisors are authorized to alter time cards for employees?
I'm not sure what you're talking about because we don't actually have time cards. We have schedules.
When I said to alter hours worked and cleaned for payment, whether it's on a card or whatever.
Authorized to alter it for what purposes?
I guess to reduce the pay.
I'm not aware of anybody being authorized to do something that is
Okay.
is like that.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much, both Mr. Tibbetts and Ms. Yearwood. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you,
Thank you.
sir.
We'll suspend for lunch and come back at 1:30 for an admin and bid meeting. And bid meeting in the committee room. We had said 2, but we're finishing early, so.